Hi, today's story. My mother-in-law said that what I went through with my abusive husband didn't sound that bad, so I cut off contact and all support. I want a divorce. The words didn't fly across the room. They drifted light as the bubbles in the vintage Bollinger clinking in 40 crystal flutes around us. Garrett stood there, his silk tie perfectly knotted, his grip firm on a glass that cost more than most people made in a week. He didn't look like a man destroying a 20-year marriage. He looked like he was checking the weather. The sound of the jazz quartet on the patio seemed to swell the brassy notes of the saxophone scraping against the inside of my skull. Around us, the cream of Napa Valley society laughed and gossiped, their expensive perfumes mingling with the earthy, rich scent of the damp soil from the Kincaid vineyard. My vineyard. "Garrett, the guess," I said. My voice sounded thin like paper tearing. I reached for the edge of the mahogany tasting table, my fingers searching for something solid. The polished wood felt cold under my skin. "This isn't the time for a joke. People are looking." "I'm not joking, Natalie." Garrett took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine. He swirled the pale gold liquid, watching the legs coat the glass. "And I don't care who's looking. In fact, it's better this way. Clean, public. You always did love a good performance." My jaw ached. I hadn't realized I was grinding my teeth until the sharp pain shot up toward my temples. I looked past him, searching for my mother. Rose was across the lawn, her silver hair gleaming under the fairy lights strung through the oak trees. Ba was holding court with the mayor's wife, her face a mask of effortless elegance. Ba caught my eye for a split second, then looked away. Something shifted in my chest. A cold, heavy weight settled where my heart used to beat. 20 years, I whispered. I looked down at my hands. The diamond anniversary band he'd given me 5 years ago felt like a lead weight. "We are celebrating our anniversary, Garrett. Our friends are here. My family is here. Your family." He let out a short, jagged laugh that made a woman nearby turn her sin. "That's the best part, Nat. Your family is exactly why this is happening. You thought you were the one holding the keys to the kingdom. You're just the person keeping the seat warm." He set his glass down on the table with a sharp clack that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden lull of the music. The stem snapped. A pool of expensive Chardonnay began to spread across the dark wood, dripping onto the Persian rug. "The papers are in my study," Garrett said, leaning in close enough that I could smell the oak and vanilla on his breath. "Don't bother with a lawyer today. Enjoy the party. It's the last one you'll ever host here." He turned and walked away, his stride easy and confident. I watched his back, the way his shoulders didn't even twitch with regret. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was filled with dry silt. I reached out to grab a napkin to stop the wine from dripping, but my hands were shaking so hard, I only succeeded in knocking a stack of gold-rimmed plates onto the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain brought the entire party to a standstill. Silence drifted over the lawn like a fog. I stood there, surrounded by broken pieces of white clay and the smell of spilled alcohol. I looked up and saw my mother standing at the edge of the patio. Rose didn't rush over, she didn't gasp, she just stood there, her hands folded neatly over her silk clutch, watching me with a look that wasn't pity. It was something much sharper. I needed to move, I needed to breathe. I turned away from the stairs and the whispers stumbling toward the back hallway of the main house. My heels clicked unevenly on the stone path. I could hear the murmurs starting up behind me, a low hum of excitement. The Kincaid scandal of the decade was served hot with the appetizers. I made it to the mudroom and leaned against the heavy oak door, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I needed to find Garrett. I needed to understand what he meant about the vineyard. He couldn't take it. The Kincaid vineyard had been in my family for 4 generations. It was mine. My father had left it to me, not him. I headed for the study, my mind racing through bank statements and deed transfers. But as I passed the small parlor near the kitchen, I heard voices. Muffled but distinct. "Is it done?" That was my mother's voice. It was low, urgent, stripped of the melodic lilt she used for guests. "He told her," a younger woman replied. I froze. I knew that voice. Avery, my lead enologist. The girl I'd mentored for 5 years. The girl I'd treated like a younger sister. "And the reaction?" Rose asked. "She broke some plates," Avery said. There was a smile in her voice. I could hear it. "Just like you said she would. She's predictable, Rose. Always has been." "Good," my mother said. I heard the clink of a lighter, the faint scent of her thin Virginia Slims wafting under the door. The sooner she's out of the way, the sooner we can finalize the sale to the developers. Garrett is ready to sign his half over, but we need to make sure Natalie is unstable. A woman in her state shouldn't be making business decisions for an estate of this magnitude. I leaned my forehead against the cool wallpaper of the hallway. The floral patterns seemed to swirl and blur. My mother. My own mother was talking about selling the land she'd spent her life pretending to protect. What about the clauses? Avery asked. The ones her father put in the will. Don't worry about the dead, Avery, Rose snapped. Focus on the living. Garrett is waiting for you in the guest house. Go, make sure he doesn't lose his nerve. I'll handle my daughter. I backed away, my boots silent on the runner. I felt like I was walking through deep water. Every movement took a Herculean effort. I found myself in the kitchen staring at the industrial refrigerator. I wasn't sad. The word felt too small, too pathetic for the hollowed-out sensation in my gut. I felt like I'd spent 30 years memorizing a map to a country that didn't exist. My husband, my mother, my protege, they weren't just leaving me. They were erasing me. The swinging door to the kitchen pushed open. Rose walked in, her face instantly shifting back to the mask of concerned matriarch. "Natalie, darling," she said, reaching out with a manicured hand. "I saw what happened. Garrett is being quite difficult, isn't he? Come, let's go upstairs. You need a drink and a lie down. I'll tell the guests you've had a migraine." I looked at her hand. The skin was crepey, the gold rings heavy on her fingers. This was the woman who had tucked me in, the woman who had told me that a Kincaid woman never bows her head. "You knew," I said. My voice was no longer a whisper. It was steady, cold. Rose paused, her hand hovering in the air. "I don't know what you mean, dear." "I heard you, Mother. You and Avery." The mask didn't slip. It dissolved. Rose straightened her spine, her eyes turning into chips of gray flint. She let her hand drop to her side. "Well," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "I suppose that saves us a very tedious conversation. You're selling the vineyard to developers Dad would turn in his grave." Rose let out a sharp, dry sound that might have been a laugh. "Your father was a romantic, Natalie. Romantics die broke. This land is worth $40 million as a golf resort. As a winery, it's a pit we throw money into so you can feel important. I made this place profitable." I stepped toward her, my fists clenching at my sides. "I saved this place after the fire. I spent 10 years in the dirt while you were in Palm Springs." "And yet," Rose said, stepping closer until she was inches from my face, "you were so busy looking at the vines that you forgot to look at your husband. Or your bank accounts. Garrett didn't just decide to leave you today, Natalie. He's been preparing for this for 18 months, with my help." I reached out and grabbed the edge of the prep table to keep from falling. My stomach twisted. 18 months, every dinner, every "I love you," every plan for the future. All of it had been a countdown. "Why?" I asked. Rose reached out and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. Her touch made my skin crawl. "Because you're just like your father, Natalie. You have no vision. You're content to stay small. I want to live the rest of my life in comfort, not worrying about the harvest or the rainfall." "I won't sign," I said. "Garrett can't sell his half without my consent. It's in the bylaws." Rose smiled. It was the smile a predator gives a trapped animal right before the end. "That's the part you haven't realized yet, darling," she whispered. "Garrett isn't just taking his half. He's taking yours too. He told me today, right before he went out there, that he found the original deed. The one your father restructured 20 years ago." She leaned in, her breath smelling of peppermint and tobacco. "You don't own the vineyard, Natalie. You never did. Rosewood Holdings owns it. And guess who owns Rosewood?" I stared at her, the room tilting on its axis. "Garrett does," she said. "And he's already agreed to give me 30% of the sale price once you're gone." The back door opened and Garrett walked in. He didn't look at me. He looked at Rose. "The car is packed," he said. "Avery is waiting." He finally turned his gaze to me. There was no anger in his eyes, just a flat clinical indifference that hurt worse than a blow to the face. "You have until Monday to clear out your personal things from the house, Natalie," Garrett said, his voice echoing in the large kitchen. "After that, the locks will be changed. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You've already lost." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key. My key, the one to the private cellar where my father's best vintages were kept. He tossed it onto the counter, It slid across the stainless steel, coming to rest right in front of me. Oh, and one more thing, Garrett added, pausing at the door. Your mother was right. You really should have paid more attention to the paperwork. It was all there right in front of you. You just didn't want to see it. They walked out together, leaving me alone in the kitchen. Outside, the jazz band started playing again, a jaunty, upbeat tune that felt like a mockery. I looked at the silver key. I looked at the spilled wine on the floor. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were as cold as the earth in midwinter. I reached out and picked up the key. I should have been crying. I should have been screaming, but all I could think about was the safe in the floor of the cellar. The one Garrett didn't know about. The one my father told me to open only if the world was ending. Well, the world had ended, and I was still standing. I gripped the key so hard the metal bit into my palm. I didn't care about the pain. It was the only thing that felt real. I walked toward the cellar door, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. They thought they had taken everything. They thought I was a broken woman who would disappear into the night. They were wrong. They had spent 18 months planning my destruction. They had no idea I was about to spend the rest of my life planning theirs. The silver key felt like a shard of ice pressed against my palm. I closed my hand over it, letting the jagged edges bite into my skin until the physical sting grounded me. Outside the kitchen doors, the party was a living thing, a beast that fed on the very scandal I was living through. The jazz music had shifted to something upbeat, a Gershwin tune that sounded like a mockery of my life. I didn't head for the stairs. I didn't go to my bedroom to cry into the silk pillows Garrett had bought me for our 10th anniversary. Instead, I turned toward the narrow, unassuming door behind the pantry. The air grew cooler as I descended, the scent of damp stone and fermenting grapes rising to meet me. This was the heart of the estate, a place where the dirt and the labor actually meant something. The cellar was silent, the thick limestone walls swallowing the sounds of the celebration above. I walked past rows of dusty bottles labels from 1982 and 1994, peering out from the shadows. My father had taught me how to read these bottles before I could read a chapter book. He used to say that wine never lied. It told you exactly how much sun it had seen and how much it had suffered. I reached the far corner behind a rack of unsold Merlot from a difficult harvest 5 years ago. I knelt on the cold floor, my evening gown pooling around me like a dark oil slick. My fingers searched the grout between the stones until I felt the slight familiar indentation. I pressed down, and a small section of the floor shifted with a heavy grinding sound. Inside the iron lockbox sat a thick envelope yellowed at the edges. My father had handed this to me 2 weeks before his heart gave out. He'd looked at me with those tired, watery eyes and told me that Garrett was a man who loved the fruit but hated the vine. I hadn't understood then. I had been too busy being in love to listen to a dying man's warning. I pulled the documents out. My breath caught as I scanned the lines. It wasn't just a deed. It was a series of private ledger entries and a secondary trust agreement that had never been filed with the county office. My father had anticipated my mother's greed. He knew Rose would try to liquidate the heritage for a life of leisure. The Rosewood holdings that Garrett claimed to own was a shell, a legal front that only held the rights to the equipment, not the land itself. The land remained tied to a trust that required my personal signature for any transfer of title. A soft footfall on the stairs made me freeze. I shoved the papers back into the envelope and tucked it into the hidden pocket of my skirt just as the cellar door creaked open. Natalie! It was Pilar. She was the only one who didn't sound like they were looking for a front row seat to a car wreck. She stepped into the light, her face etched with a worry that didn't have a hidden agenda. She'd been the head housekeeper for 30 years, the woman who had wiped my knees when I fell and held my hand when my father passed. "They're looking for you," Pilar whispered, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Your mother is telling everyone you've had a nervous breakdown. She's already asking the caterers to pack up the leftovers so she can send the staff home early." "Let her talk," I said, standing up and brushing the dust from my knees. I felt a strange, cold clarity settling over me. "Let them all think I'm breaking. It makes them careless." Pilar looked at my hands, then at my eyes. She didn't ask what I was doing in the dark. She just nodded, a sharp, decisive movement. "I put your small suitcase in the trunk of the old truck, not the Mercedes, the one Garrett never drives because it smells like mulch." "Thank you, Pilar." I walked toward her, my footsteps echoing. "I need you to stay. Watch them. Tell me who comes and goes, especially the developers. I see everything. she promised, her eyes dark with a quiet fury. They think this house is empty now that your father is gone. They forgot about the walls. I slipped past her, heading up the back stairs that led to the garage. I didn't look back at the main house. I didn't look at the lights, or the people who were drinking my wine while celebrating my ruin. I climbed into the old Ford, the engine turning over with a rough, honest roar that drowned out the jazz. As I drove down the long, winding driveway, I saw them. Garrett and Avery were standing on the balcony of the guest house, silhouetted against the amber light. They were holding glasses of champagne, their heads tilted toward each other. They looked like a couple in a brochure for a life they hadn't earned. I shifted the truck into gear, the tires spitting gravel, as I turned onto the main road. I had exactly $3,000 in a private account Garrett didn't know about, and a set of documents that would turn their $40 million deal into a legal nightmare. I drove until the lights of the vineyard were nothing but a faint glow in the rearview mirror. I pulled over near the old creek bridge and took out my phone. My fingers didn't tremble as I dialed a number I hadn't called in 7 years. "Sloan," I said when the line picked up, "it's Natalie Kincaid. I remember what you said at my wedding, about how I should call you if I ever realized I'd made a mistake." There was a long pause on the other end, the sound of a heavy chair creaking. Sloan was the most feared divorce attorney in Northern California, a woman who treated every case like a declaration of war. She was also the woman Garrett had forbidden me from seeing because she saw through him in 10 minutes. "I've been waiting for this call for a long time, Natalie," Sloan said, her voice like velvet wrapped around a blade. "Where are you?" "I'm on the road. I have the trust documents. My mother and Garrett are trying to sell the estate to a developer group out of San Francisco." "Let them try," Sloan replied. I could hear the sound of a pen scratching against paper. "Go to the cottage in Bodega Bay. The key is under the third planter. I'll meet you there at dawn." And Natalie, "Yes, don't cry. It wastes time we need for the paperwork." I hung up and looked out at the dark silhouette of the hills. The betrayal was a heavy stone in my chest, but for the first time in 18 months I knew exactly where I was standing. They wanted to play a game of shadows, fine. I would give them a masterclass. I put the truck in drive and headed toward the coast, leaving the life I knew behind me in the dust. The war for the Kincaid legacy had officially begun, and I was no longer the woman keeping the seat warm. I was the storm they never saw coming on the horizon. The fog rolling off the Pacific at Bodega Bay didn't feel like the scenic postcards they sold in the gift shops. It felt like a damp gray shroud pressing against the windshield of the truck and turning the world into a blur of salt spray and stunted cypress trees. I reached the cottage just as the first hint of a bruised purple light began to bleed through the horizon. My hands were stiff, the skin over my knuckles pulled tight and white from gripping the steering wheel for hours. I found the key exactly where Sloan said it would be, tucked under a heavy terracotta planter that smelled of wet earth and rosemary. The cottage was small, the air inside thick with the scent of cedar and old books. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to see my reflection in the windows. I sat at the small pine table in the kitchen, the yellowed envelope from the cellar floor resting in front of me like a live wire. The sound of a heavy engine rumbled in the driveway 2 hours later. I watched from the curtain's edge as a black SUV pulled in its tires, crunching over the bed of bleached oyster shells. Sloan stepped out, her trench coat belted tight, her silver hair pulled back into a knot so sharp it looked like it could draw blood. She didn't knock. She just walked in carrying a leather briefcase and a thermal carafe of coffee. "You look like hell, Natalie," Sloan said, setting the coffee on the table. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered a ceramic mug. "Drink this. Black. No sugar. We have work to do." I took a sip, the heat scalding my throat. "They think they own it, Sloan." Garrett told the guests he was the owner of Rosewood Holdings. My mother laughed about it in the kitchen. Sloan snapped open her briefcase, the metallic sound sharp in the quiet room. "Garrett is a man who plays checkers in a room full of people playing chess. He saw the name on the front of the folder and assumed he knew the contents. Men like him always do." She reached out and pulled the yellowed trust documents toward her, her glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. For 30 minutes, the only sound was the rustle of paper and the distant rhythmic boom of the surf against the cliffs. I watched her eyes move back and forth, tracking the lines of my father's cramped, precise handwriting. "Your father was a paranoid old soul," Sloan finally whispered, a faint smile touching her lips. "Thank God for that. Look here on page 12. The secondary trust doesn't just hold the land, it holds a reciprocal debt clause. If any entity attempts to transfer the title without the unanimous consent of the named beneficiaries, which is you, the entire value of the commercial equipment, the bottling plant, and the current inventory is immediately called as a lien against the holding company. I leaned forward, my heart giving a strange, frantic thump. What does that mean in plain English? It means, Sloane said, tapping a red lacquered fingernail against the paper, that the moment Garrett signs that contract with the developers, he triggers a debt of $15 million that he doesn't have. He'll be selling a vineyard he doesn't own to pay for equipment he's about to lose. He's not just going to be broke, Natalie. He's going to be sued into the Stone Age by the very people he's trying to get rich with. I leaned back, the wooden chair creaking under my weight. I thought about Garrett standing on that balcony with Avery toasted their future with my father's champagne. I thought about my mother Rose calculating her 30% share while she watched me break porcelain on the patio. I don't just want to stop the sale, I said. My voice was low, vibrating with a cold energy I didn't recognize. I want them to feel the floor drop out from under them. I want them to sign that contract. I want them to commit. Sloane looked at me, then her sharp blue eyes assessing. That's a dangerous game. If you let them sign, we have to be perfect with the timing of the injunction. If we're a day late, the developers might start moving dirt. I know the soil, I replied. They won't move an inch without the water rights, and those are buried in a separate filing in my father's name. It'll take them weeks to realize the tap is dry. Then we wait, Sloane said, closing the briefcase. Let them celebrate. Let them spend money they don't have. In the meantime, I need you to go back. The coffee went cold in my hand. Back to the house, not as the mistress of the manor, Sloane said, as the grieving, broken wife. You have until Monday to move your things, remember? Use that time. I need the digital records from Garrett's home office. He's been planning this for 18 months. There will be emails, wire transfers, and probably a very interesting set of documents regarding your mother's involvement. If we can prove conspiracy to commit fraud, we don't just get the vineyard, we get everything. The drive back to Napa felt shorter, though the sun was now high and merciless. I didn't take the truck. I left it at a diner 5 miles out and took a taxi, telling the driver to drop me at the end of the long driveway. I walked the rest of the way, my heels dragging in the gravel, making sure my hair was a mess and my eyes were red from the wind. The house looked different now. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a crime scene. As I climbed the steps to the front porch, the door swung open. Avery was standing there wearing one of my silk robes, a coffee mug in her hand. My coffee mug. The one with the hand-painted vines I'd bought in Italy. "Oh, Natalie," Avery said, her voice dripping with a fake honeyed sweetness that made my stomach turn. "We didn't think you'd be back so soon. Garrett said you'd probably gone to a hotel to compose yourself." I didn't look at her directly. I kept my gaze on the floor, my shoulders hunched. "I just need my things, Avery. Garrett said I had until Monday." "Of course," she said, stepping aside, though she didn't move an inch more than necessary. "Just try to stay out of the way. The architects are coming over this afternoon to do the initial measurements for the clubhouse. Rose is with them in the dining room." I walked past her, the scent of her perfume a cheap floral cloud that seemed to stain the air. I made my way up the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited until I heard the laughter from the dining room, the clink of silver against china, as they enjoyed a brunch I had paid for. I slipped into Garrett's study. The room smelled of his expensive cigars and the leather of his desk chair. I went straight for the mahogany cabinet behind the bookshelf. He thought he was the only one with the key, but I'd watched him hide it in the base of a brass lamp a dozen times. My fingers were slick with sweat as I unlocked the drawer and pulled out his laptop. I didn't have much time. I could hear my mother's voice rising in the hallway, her sharp, authoritative tone as she directed the architects. "And we'll clear those vines first," Rose was saying, her voice coming closer to the door. "They obstruct the view of the valley. We want the infinity pool right where the Cabernet block is now." I bit my lips so hard I tasted copper. Those vines were 60 years old. They were the soul of the estate. I plugged the thumb drive into the laptop and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 10%. 20. The doorknob turned. I shoved the laptop back into the drawer and barely managed to click it shut as the door swung open. My mother stood there, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits holding blueprints. "Natalie," Rose said, her eyebrows arching. "What are you doing in here? Garrett's office is private." "I was looking for my passport," I said, my voice trembling. It wasn't hard to fake the fear. I thought it might be in the safe. Rose stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the desk, the lamp, the cabinet. She walked over to me, her silk skirt rustling like a snake in the grass. She reached out and gripped my chin, forcing me to look at her. "Don't be tedious, Natalie," she whispered, so the men couldn't hear. "The passport is in the foyer closet where it's been for 10 years. Get your bags and get out. You're depressing the help." She let go of me with a flick of her wrist as if she were discarding a piece of trash. I stumbled toward the door, keeping my head down, my hand buried in my pocket, clutching the thumb drive. I made it to my bedroom and locked the door, collapsing against the wood. I could hear them downstairs shouting orders, talking about bulldozers and concrete. They were already tearing the heart out of the Kincaid legacy in their minds. I looked down at the thumb drive. Sloan had told me to wait, to let them sign. But as I heard the sound of Garrett's car pulling into the circle, followed by a second heavier vehicle, I realized the developers weren't coming next week. They were here now. I walked to the window and looked out at the rolling hills, the green vines stretching out like a promise under the California sun. Garrett was stepping out of his car, shaking hands with a man in a dark suit who held a thick leather folder, the contract. They were going to sign it today right there on the porch where my father used to sit and watch the sun set. I looked at the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over Sloane's name. If I stopped them now, they'd walk away with their dignity intact. If I let them sign, I was gambling everything I had left. The sound of laughter floated up from the patio. I saw Rose hand a pen to Garrett. He looked up at my window for a brief second, a smirk of pure unadulterated triumph on his face before he leaned over the table to sign his name. I didn't call Sloane. I didn't scream. I just watched as he handed the pen to my mother. "Go ahead," I thought, my breath fogging the glass. "Sign it. Sign away a world you don't own. I've spent 20 years being the quiet wife. You're about to find out what happens when the quiet one stops playing by the rules." Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a fresh bruise. I stood in the foyer of the main house, a single cardboard box in my arms. The rest of my life was already packed into the bed of the truck, idling outside. I hadn't taken much, just clothes, a few books, and the framed photo of my father that had sat on my nightstand for 20 years. Rose was standing by the heavy oak door, guarding it like a sentry. She wore a silk dressing gown that swept the floor, a cup of herbal tea steaming in her hand. She didn't look tired. She looked victorious. "Is that the last of it?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the box in my arms. "We have a walkthrough with the interior designers at noon. I don't want them tripping over your clutter." "It's the last of it," I said. My voice was steady, though my pulse was hammering a frantic rhythm against my collarbone. Rose stepped closer, peering into the box. She reached in and plucked out a small silver velvet pouch. "What's this, grandmother's rosary?" I said. "The one she brought from Ireland." "Leave it," Rose said, dropping the pouch back onto the entry table. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. "It belongs to the estate. We're going to display it in the clubhouse. A bit of authentic history adds value to the membership tiers." My fingers tightened on the cardboard until the edges buckled. That rosary had been in my hands during my father's funeral. It had been in my hands during the miscarriage 3 years ago that Garrett never talked about. "It's a string of beads, Mother," I said, forcing my muscles to relax. "Keep it. If it buys you a better membership, she would have wanted that for you." Rose's eyes narrowed. She had expected a fight. She had wanted tears. When I didn't give them to her, she looked almost disappointed. She took a sip of her tea, her gaze drifting over my shoulder to the driveway. "You know we're doing this for your own good, Natalie," she said, the lie slipping out as easily as a breath. "You were never cut out for the pressure of this place. You'll be happier in a condo in the city, somewhere small, manageable." "I'm sure I will," I said. I walked past her, the air shifting as I moved from the climate-controlled house into the damp morning chill. "Goodbye, Rose." I didn't wait for her to answer. I walked to the truck, tossed the box onto the passenger seat, and climbed in. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The house behind me was just wood and stone. The legacy wasn't in the walls, it was in the dirt. And I had the dirt in my veins. I drove straight to Sloane's office in downtown Napa. The building was a modern fortress of glass and steel, a sharp contrast to the rolling vines and rustic barns of the valley. The receptionist didn't ask for my name. She just pointed toward the corner office. Sloane was standing by the window looking out at the street. Her desk was covered in stacks of paper, But one document sat alone in the center of the blotting pad. It was stamped with the official seal of the county clerk. "It's done," I asked, closing the door behind me. Sloane turned. She looked like a general who had just ordered an airstrike. "Filed 17 minutes ago, the Notice of Pendency of Action. It's colloquially known as a lis pendens." I sank into the leather chair opposite her desk. My knees felt weak. "Explain it to me again, just so I know what I'm waiting for." Sloane sat down and tapped the document. "It puts a cloud on the title. It notifies the world that the ownership of the Kincaid Vineyard is under litigation. Specifically, it triggers the clause in your father's trust. Garrett signed a contract yesterday to sell the land. But because of this filing, he can't transfer clear title. And the money," I asked. "That's the beautiful part." Sloane said, a shark-like grin spreading across her face. "The developers Apex Group are serious players. They don't mess around with disputed titles. Their contract almost certainly has a performance clause. If Garrett can't deliver a clean title within 48 hours of signing, the initial deposit is frozen. And since he likely used that projected deposit to secure the bridge loan for the equipment he's trying to leverage, he's insolvent," I finished. "He's worse than insolvent," Sloane corrected. "He's exposed. He committed fraud the moment he signed that paper, claiming he had full authority to sell. We aren't just stopping the sale, Natalie. We're handing the district attorney a roadmap to an indictment." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10 in the morning. The banks were open. The county clerk's office was processing the daily filings. "How long until he knows?" I asked. Sloane checked her watch. "Apex's legal team runs title checks every Monday morning on active contracts. Their automated system probably flagged it 5 minutes ago. They'll call their bank. Their bank will call Garrett's bank. I'd say you have about—" Her desk phone buzzed. Sloane looked at the caller ID and raised an eyebrow. "Speak of the devil," she whispered. She pressed the speaker button. "Sloane Dampier, you vindictive witch!" Garrett's voice filled the room. It was high, tight stripping gears. He wasn't using his public voice. This was the voice he used when the credit card bill came in high. "What did you file? My broker just called me. He says the accounts are frozen." Sloane leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "Hello, Garrett. I assume you're referring to the lien against the commercial assets of the Kincaid estate." "There are no assets," Garrett screamed. I could hear background noise. Traffic. He was driving. "I own Rosewood Holdings. I own the equipment." "Actually," Sloane said, her voice dropping to a soothing, dangerous purr, "you own a shell company that is now the subject of a fraud investigation. And since you attempted to sell land held in a trust without the beneficiary's consent, we've exercised the reciprocal debt clause. You owe the trust $15 million, Garrett, payable immediately." "I don't have $15 million. "Then I suggest you don't spend any money on architects," Sloane said, "or hotels, or jewelry for your staff." There was a silence on the line. Heavy breathing silence. "Put her on," Garrett snarled. "I know she's there. She doesn't have the stomach for this. Put her on." Sloane looked at me. She didn't nudge the phone toward me. She waited. It was my choice. I reached out and pressed the button. "I'm here, Garrett." "Natalie," he said. His tone shifted instantly. The anger bled out, replaced by a patronizing, desperate wheedle. "Baby, listen. You don't understand what you've done. These people, the developers, they aren't the kind of people you mess with. They have penalties. Huge penalties. If this deal doesn't go through, we lose everything. The house, the vineyard, your father's legacy, it'll all be auctioned off." "It's not we anymore, Garrett," I said. "And the vineyard isn't going to be auctioned off. You are." "You can't do this," he hissed. "You're weak. You've always been weak. You think you can run this place? You can't even run a dinner party without breaking the china." "I know," I said. "I'm very clumsy. I just broke your entire life, didn't I?" I cut the connection before he could answer. Sloane let out a low whistle. "Not bad for a Monday morning." "It's not over," I said, standing up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. "He's right about one thing. He doesn't have the money, which means he's going to go to Rose." "Rose doesn't have liquid cash," Sloane said. "She has annuities and a closet full of Chanel. She can't bail him out." "No," I said, walking to the window. "But she has the connections. She knows the zoning board. She knows the water district. If they can't sell the land, they'll try to scorch the earth, so I can't have it either." I looked down at the street below. A black sedan was double parked in front of the building. I recognized the driver. It was the man from the balcony, the developer. "Sloane, I said, pointing down. Apex is here. Sloan stood up and joined me at the window. Fast. I like them fast. It means they're worried. They aren't coming to negotiate, I said. Look who got out of the passenger side. It was Avery. She was wearing a suit that looked suspiciously like one I had donated to charity last year. She was talking to the developer, pointing up at our window. She looked frantic. Why is the winemaker with the developers? Sloan asked. Because she's not just the winemaker, I said, the pieces clicking together in my mind. Garrett said he'd been planning this for 18 months. Avery started 18 months ago. She wasn't hired to make wine, Sloan. She was hired to sabotage the vintage. Sloan turned to me, her eyes wide. If she tampered with the product, that's not just fraud. That's criminal negligence. It destroys the valuation of the inventory. That's their backup plan, I said. If they can't sell the land as a resort, they'll declare the vineyard failing. They'll claim the soil is exhausted or the vines are diseased. They'll drive the value down to zero so they can buy it out of bankruptcy for pennies on the dollar. We need proof, Sloan said. We need the logs, the tank sheets, the chemical analysis. They're in the lab, I said. At the main house. You can't go back there, Sloan warned. Garrett will be there. Rose will be there. I don't need to go to the main house, I said. I have Pilar. I pulled out my phone. I had one text message from Pilar. It was a photo. It was blurry, taken from a distance, but clear enough to see. It showed Avery standing next to the main irrigation pump holding a wrench. I typed back, "Don't let her touch the valves. Call the sheriff if you have to." I looked at Sloan. Garrett is the distraction. Rose is the money, but Avery is the weapon. And she's about to poison the well. We need a temporary restraining order, Sloan said, already moving back to her computer. I can get a judge on the phone in 10 minutes. Do it, I said. I'm going to the vineyard. Natalie, no, Sloan said, stopping her typing. Let the police handle it. The police take 20 minutes to get out to the valley, I said, grabbing my purse. Avery can dump 5,000 gallons of sulfite into the irrigation line in 5. If she kills those vines, it doesn't matter who owns the deed. There won't be anything left to fight for. I ran out of the office, ignoring the elevator and taking the stairs 2 at a time. I burst out onto the sidewalk just as Avery and the developer were walking into the lobby. Avery froze when she saw me. Her face went pale, her eyes darting to the developer. Natalie, she stammered. We were just... I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I walked right up to her, invading her personal space until I could smell the fear radiating off her. I know about the tank logs, Avery, I whispered loud enough for the developer to hear. And I know about the irrigation pump. If one drop of water touches those vines today, you won't just be fired, you'll be in federal prison. The developer looked at Avery, then at me. He took a step back. What tank logs? What is she talking about? She's crazy, Avery said, her voice shrill. She's having a breakdown, Rose said. Rose isn't here, I said to the developer, and neither is the title. If I were you, I'd check your contract again, specifically the clause about undisclosed liabilities. I brushed past them and ran for my truck. I heard the developer shouting something behind me, but I didn't listen. I had 10 miles to drive and a vineyard to save. The war wasn't in the courtroom anymore. It was in the field, and I was done playing defense. The engine of the old Ford truck roared like a wounded animal as I pushed it past 60 miles an hour on the narrow vineyard service road. Dust billowed out behind me, a choking brown cloud that obscured the immaculate rows of Cabernet vines stretching out on either side. My hands were slick on the steering wheel, not from heat, but from a cold, vibrating terror. I wasn't driving toward a burning building. I was driving toward something worse. Fire you could see, fire you could fight with water. But what Avery was about to do, what she was standing at the pump house preparing to unleash, was invisible until it was too late. Potassium metabisulfite. In small doses, it protected the wine. In the concentration she had access to pump directly into the drip irrigation lines, it would burn the root systems of 40 acres of vines in less than an hour. The plants wouldn't just die. They would be poisoned from the inside out, the soil salted for a generation. I saw the pump house. Ahead, a low concrete bunker, nestled against the tree line of the creek. A silver sedan was parked haphazardly in the tall grass, the driver's door left wide open. I didn't bother braking gently. I slammed the truck into park before it had fully stopped the transmission, screaming in protest. I hit the ground running, the gravel biting into the soles of my boots. Avery, my voice tore through the heavy afternoon silence. She was there. She was standing by the main intake valve, a 50-pound bag of white powder slumped against her leg. She had a bucket in one hand and a heavy iron wrench in the other. She looked up when she heard me, her eyes wide and glassy like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck. "Don't come any closer, Natalie," she screamed, raising the wrench. Her hand was shaking so hard, the metal tool wobbled in the air. "I'll do it. I swear to God, I'll open the valve." I stopped 10 feet away from her. The air here smelled of damp concrete and the sharp, stinging scent of sulfur. The main pump was humming a rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum that sounded like a giant heartbeat. "You don't want to do this, Avery," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Look at your hands. You're shaking. You know this is wrong." "I don't have a choice," she shouted, tears streaking through the dust on her face. "Garrett said, he said the sale depends on the yield being low. He said if I did this, he'd give me the winemaker position at the new resort. He promised me the reserve label." "Garrett lied to you," I said, taking a slow step forward. "Just like he lied to me. There is no resort, Avery. There is no reserve label. There is just a federal investigation and a jail cell waiting for whoever turns that wheel." Avery looked at the wheel, then back at me. "He said he'd protect me. He said it would look like an accident, a calculation error in the mix." "There are no accidents with 500 pounds of sulfite," I said. "And Garrett, he's not going to protect you. He's going to blame you. He's going to tell the police that you were a disgruntled employee who went rogue. Who do you think they're going to believe, the wealthy owner or the assistant with the student loans?" Avery's face crumbled. The wrench lowered an inch. I already mixed the first batch," she whispered, looking down at the bucket. The liquid inside was a cloudy, lethal gray. "I just have to pour it in. It's worth $50,000, Natalie. I need the money. My mom is sick." "I know," I said softly. "I paid for her surgery last year, remember? Out of my personal account. Because that's what family does. And I thought you were family." The words hit her harder than a slap. She flinched, her grip on the bucket tightening. "Put it down, Avery. Walk away. We can fix this. But if you pour that into the line, there is no coming back. You kill these vines, you kill my father's memory. Is Garrett's money worth that?" For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the drone of the pump and the wind rustling the oak leaves. Avery looked at the bucket. She looked at the vines, the gnarled, beautiful wood that had stood on this land since before she was born. Then a siren wailed in the distance. The sound broke the spell. Avery's head snapped up. Panic, raw and animalistic, flooded her eyes. "You called the cops!" she shrieked. She grabbed the bucket with both hands. "I have to finish it. He'll kill me if I don't finish it." She lunged toward the intake pipe. I didn't think, I didn't calculate. I threw myself at her. We collided with a bone-jarring thud against the concrete wall of the pump house. The bucket flew out of her hands, the gray liquid splashing across the dirt and hissing as it hit the hot metal of the pump casing. The smell of sulfur exploded into the air, choking and acrid. Avery scrambled, clawing at my arms, her fingernails digging into my skin. She was younger than me, stronger than me, fueled by pure desperation. She kicked out her boot, connecting with my shin, sending a bolt of white-hot pain up my leg. I gritted my teeth and held on. I grabbed the collar of her jacket and used my weight to pin her against the wall. "Stop it!" I yelled right in her face. "It's over, Avery, look." I pointed toward the access road. 2 sheriff's cruisers were tearing down the lane, their lights flashing red and blue against the green canopy of the vineyard. Avery went limp. She slid down the wall, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with ragged sobs. I stepped back, gasping for air. My leg throbbed, and there was a burning sensation on my arm where the chemical splash had grazed my skin. I looked at the intake pipe. It was dry. The valve was closed. The vines were safe. Sheriff Miller was the first one out of the car. He had known my father for 30 years. He looked at me then, at the spilled chemicals, then at the girl crying on the ground. He didn't need a statement. He unholstered his radio. "Dispatch, we have the situation contained at the Kincaid place," he said, his voice flat. "Send a hazmat crew for cleanup, and get a detective out here." I leaned against the warm concrete of the pump house, watching as a deputy gently pulled Avery to her feet and recited her rights. She didn't fight. She looked small, defeated, a child playing a game she didn't understand. As they were putting her in the back of the cruiser, a black Range Rover screeched to a halt behind the police cars. Garrett jumped out. He was wearing his golf shirt and slacks, looking like he'd just come from a country club lunch. "Officer!" Garrett shouted, marching toward us with a practiced air of indignation. "Thank God you're here. I came as soon as I heard. This girl, she's been unstable for weeks. I tried to fire her yesterday, but she refused to leave the property." He stopped when he saw me. His eyes flicked to the spilled chemicals, then to Avery in the back of the car, and finally to my face. "Natalie," he said, breathless, putting a hand over his heart. "Are you hurt? Did she attack you? I told Rose we should have changed the gate codes earlier." I stared at him. It was a marvel, really, the speed with which he rewrote reality. He actually believed he could talk his way out of this. He thought he could spin a web of words strong enough to hold the weight of his own sins. Sheriff Miller stepped between us. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and silent, the kind of man who judged you by your handshake and your fences. "Mr. Kincaid," the sheriff said, "you might want to step back." "Step back," Garrett bristled. "This is my property, Miller. That girl is my employee. I want to press charges immediately. Attempted destruction of property, assault, whatever sticks." "She's already under arrest, Garrett," I said. My voice was raspy from the sulfur fumes. "And she's going to talk. She's going to tell them about the promise of the reserve label. She's going to tell them about the text messages on her phone, where you told her exactly which valve to open." Garrett's face went the color of old parchment. "She's a liar. She's trying to save her own skin. We'll see," I said. "Oh, and Garrett, the sheriff isn't the only one here." I nodded toward the second cruiser. Sloane was stepping out of the passenger side. She held a thick manila envelope in her hand. She walked over to us, her heels sinking slightly in the soft dirt, but her posture as rigid as steel. "Garrett Kincaid," Sloane said, handing the envelope to the sheriff. "This is a temporary restraining order granted by Judge Harmon 10 minutes ago. It bars you from coming within 500 feet of the vineyard, the winery, or Natalie. It also freezes all assets related to the estate pending the fraud investigation." Garrett looked at the envelope in the sheriff's hand. He looked at the deputies who had stopped watching Avery and were now watching him. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, backing away. "You can't kick me off my own land. I live here." "Not anymore," Sloane said. "The order includes the residence. You have 30 minutes to collect your essential items, under police supervision." Garrett turned to me. The mask dropped completely. There was no charm left, no sophistication, just the snarling face of a cornered rat. "You think you've won?" He hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "You think you can run this place without me? You're nothing, Natalie. You're a gardener in a fancy dress. You'll be bankrupt in 6 months. "Maybe," I said. I reached down and picked up a handful of dirt. I crushed a clod of earth between my fingers, feeling the grit and the moisture. It was real. It was mine, but at least I'll be bankrupt on my own land. "Get off my property, Garrett." Sheriff Miller put a hand on his gun belt. "You heard the lady, Mr. Kincaid. 30 minutes. Deputy Reynolds will escort you to the house." I watched him go. I watched the man I had shared a bed with for 20 years walk away between 2 police officers, defeated not by a grand scheme, but by the simple, stubborn truth of the soil. Sloane came up beside me. She didn't say anything. She just handed me a bottle of water. I drank it in one long gulp, washing the taste of sulfur and betrayal out of my mouth. "Is it over?" I asked, looking at the back of the retreating police car. "The criminal part just starting," Sloane said. "Avery will cut a deal. She'll testify against him to stay out of prison. Garrett is done. And the sale, dead," Sloane said. "Apex pulled the contract the minute the restraining order hit the wire. They don't want the bad press." I nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion crash over me. My leg was throbbing, and I wanted nothing more than to sleep for a week. But as I looked up toward the main house, I saw a figure standing on the balcony. It was Rose. She was watching us through a pair of binoculars. Even from this distance, I could feel her gaze, cold, calculating, unmoved. Garrett was a fool. He was greedy and arrogant, and he had made mistakes. But Rose didn't make mistakes. She didn't leave text messages. She didn't sign fraudulent contracts. She operated in the shadows, using people like Garrett and Avery as pawns. "It's not over," I whispered, crushing the empty water bottle in my hand. "Garrett was just the muscle. Rose is the architect. We can't get her on the fraud," Sloane admitted, following my gaze. "Her name isn't on any of the documents. She kept her hands clean. She always does," I said. "She's going to pivot. She's going to play the victim. She'll say Garrett duped her too. She'll try to stay in the house. The restraining order doesn't cover her, Sloane confirmed. She has tenant rights. It could take months to evict her. I looked at the house on the hill looming over the vineyard like a stone fortress. I thought about the dining room where she held court. I thought about the way she had looked at me when I broke the plates. I don't have months, I said. Harvest is in 3 weeks. If she's in that house, she'll poison the crew. She'll poison the buyers. She'll find another way to burn it down. So, what do you want to do? Sloane asked. I turned back to the truck. I was dirty, I was injured, and I was tired. But I was also the daughter of John Kincaid, and I knew something about this land that Rose didn't. I knew where the skeletons were buried. I'm going to take a shower, I said, and then I'm going to invite my mother to dinner. It's time we had a family talk. Natalie, Sloane warned, be careful. I'm done being careful, Sloane, I said, opening the truck door. I'm going to give her a choice. She can leave with her dignity, or she can leave with the truth coming out. Either way, she's leaving. The hot water in the master bathroom was turned up as high as it would go. I stood under the spray for 20 minutes, scrubbing my skin with a loofah until it was raw and pink. I wanted to wash away the smell of sulfur and the feeling of Avery's desperate clawing hands, but mostly, I wanted to wash away the daughter I had been. That woman, the one who kept the peace, the one who looked the other way, swirled down the drain with the soap suds. I dried off and dressed slowly. I didn't put on the comfortable yoga pants I usually wore in the evenings. I put on a pair of dark tailored trousers and a crisp white button-down shirt. I pulled my hair back into a tight chignon, the way my grandmother used to wear hers. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim of divorce. I saw the owner of Kincaid Vineyards. I walked downstairs. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. I could smell roasting chicken and rosemary wafting from the kitchen. It was a domestic smell, comforting and familiar, which made it all the more terrifying. It was the smell of a lie. I entered the dining room. The table was set for 2. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, linen napkins folded into perfect swans. And there at the head of the table sat Rose. She didn't look like a woman whose son-in-law had just been escorted off the property by the sheriff. She didn't look like a woman whose Sikio conspirator was currently sitting in a holding cell. She looked immaculate in a navy cashmere sweater, pouring herself a glass of Pinot Noir. You're late, Rose said, not looking up. The chicken is resting. I hope you're hungry. It's been a chaotic afternoon. I pulled out the chair opposite her. The heavy wood scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made her flinch almost imperceptibly. Chaotic, I repeated, sitting down. That's one word for it. Another word might be criminal. Rose finally looked at me. Her eyes were cool, assessing like a banker looking at a questionable loan application. Don't be dramatic, Natalie. It doesn't suit you. What happened with Avery was unfortunate, but she was always a hysterical girl. I warned Garrett she wasn't up to the task. The task of poisoning the vineyard, I asked. I reached for the wine bottle, but I didn't pour a glass. I just moved it to the center of the table out of her reach. Rose sighed a small, disappointed sound. The task of management, dear. Obviously, she snapped under pressure. And Garrett? Well, Garrett proved to be disappointing as well. I suppose I should apologize for backing the wrong horse. He seemed so promising when you married him. She picked up her knife and fork and began to carve the chicken breast on her plate with surgical precision. You aren't going to rewrite this, Mother, I said. My voice was soft, but it filled the room. I saw the text messages on Avery's phone. I saw the call logs. You weren't just backing Garrett, you were directing him. Rose paused. She put a piece of chicken in her mouth and chewed slowly. She swallowed, took a sip of wine, and dabbed her lips with the linen napkin. And if I was bits, she asked. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Why? I asked. It was the only question that mattered. Why destroy the legacy Dad built this place for us? For you. Rose let out a short, sharp laugh. She dropped her fork onto the plate. It clattered loudly, a crack in her perfect composure. For me, she asked, her voice rising. He built this place for himself, Natalie. He built a shrine to his own ego and trapped me inside it. Do you know what I wanted when I was 22? I wanted to travel. I wanted to live in Paris. Instead, I spent 40 years listening to your father talk about rainfall and rootstock. I spent 40 years scrubbing mud out of carpets and pretending to care about the sugar content of a grape. She leaned forward, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated resentment. "I hate this place," she hissed. "I hate the smell of it. I hate the dirt. I hate the way it took him away from me, and I hate the way it took you away from me. You were supposed to be my daughter. Instead, you became his shadow." I looked at her, really looked at her. For years I had seen her as the grieving widow, the matriarch trying to hold on. Now I saw the truth. She was a prisoner who had tried to burn down the prison to escape. "So you decided to sell it," I said, "to turn it into a golf course. Because concrete is cleaner than soil." "Because money is freedom," Rose corrected. $40 million, Natalie. We could have gone anywhere. We could have been anyone. But you had to be sentimental. You had to be just like him. She reached for her wine glass, her hand trembling slightly. "It doesn't matter now. Garrett messed it up. We'll have to find another buyer. Perhaps the Italians. They've been asking about the estate for years." I stared at her, stunned by her delusion. She actually thought this was a setback. She thought we were still partners. "There is no we, Rose," I said. I reached into the pocket of my trousers and pulled out a single piece of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a court order. It was a printout of a flight itinerary. I slid it across the polished table. "What is this?" Rosa asked, looking down at it. "A one-way ticket to Scottsdale," I said. "It leaves at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I've already called for a car service to pick you up at 5. Rose looked up at me, her eyes widening. "You can't be serious. This is my house." "No," I said. "It was Dad's house. Now it's mine. You live here as a guest. And as of today, your invitation is revoked." "I have rights," Rose sputtered, her face flushing red. "I have tenancy rights. Sloan told you about the eviction process." I interrupted. "She didn't tell you about the other option. The one where I hand the district attorney the emails between you and the developers. The ones where you discuss the Avery problem and suggest a solution." Rose went still. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking old and frail. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I'm your mother, and he was your husband," I said, pointing to the empty chair at the head of the table where my father used to sit. "That didn't stop you from trying to erase him." I stood up, my legs felt heavy but strong. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up the bottle of vintage Cabernet, the one my father had bottled the year I was born. I poured myself a glass. "You can take whatever fits in 2 suitcases," I said, watching the red wine swirl in the glass. "Everything else stays. The furniture, the art, the jewelry Dad gave you. It's all part of the estate. And since you tried to defraud the estate, you forfeit your claim to the assets." Rose stood up slowly. She looked small now. The grand dame of Napa Valley had evaporated, leaving behind a bitter, selfish old woman. "You'll be alone," she said. It was a threat, not a warning. "You'll sit in this big empty house with your dirt and your vines, and you'll rot, just like he did." "Maybe," I said, taking a sip of the wine. It tasted of blackberries and earth and history. "But I'll sleep at night." Rose stared at me for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out of the dining room. She didn't look back. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood stairs, a fading rhythm of retreat. I stood alone in the dining room. The roast chicken was getting cold. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the silence. I walked to the head of the table. I placed my hand on the back of my father's chair. It was still warm from where Rose had been sitting, but that warmth would fade. I sat down. For the first time in 20 years, the seat didn't feel too big. It felt like it fit. I took a bite of the chicken. It was dry. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. "Pilar?" I said when she answered. "I'm here, mi hija." Pilar's voice was warm and steady. "Is she gone?" "She's packing," I said. "She leaves in the morning. I need you to come over tomorrow. Bring the crew. Bring everyone." "For the harvest?" Pilar asked. "No," I said, looking around the room at the silk curtains and the stuffy portraits Rose had hung on the walls. "For a bonfire. We're going to clear this house out. We're going to open the windows and let the air in. And then," I paused, looking out the window at the dark rows of vines stretching to the horizon. "And then," I said, "we're going to make some wine." I hung up the phone and sat back in the chair. The war was over. The traitors were gone. But as I looked at the dark reflection in the window, I knew the hard work was just beginning. I had saved the vineyard. Now I had to prove I was strong enough to keep it. My phone buzzed again. A text message. It wasn't from Pilar. It wasn't from Sloan. It was from an unknown number. You think you cleaned house, Natalie, but you missed a spot. Check the basement safe, the one you don't know about. I stared at the screen, the chill returning to my spine. I thought I knew all the secrets in this house. Apparently, the house had one more story to tell. The basement of the main house was different from the wine cellar. The cellar smelled of potential of oak and grape skins, and the slow, beautiful chemistry of fermentation. The basement just smelled of old dust and secrets that had gone stale in the dark. I stood at the bottom of the wooden stairs, the flashlight on my phone cutting a thin, trembling beam through the gloom. The text message from the unknown number burned in my mind, the safe you don't know about. I knew where the wall safe was in the study. I knew where the floor safe was in the cellar. But this house was built in 1920 during Prohibition. It had hollow spaces in the walls, where my grandfather used to hide cases of whiskey from the federal agents. I walked toward the far wall behind the ancient furnace that hadn't been turned on in a decade. The concrete was cold and damp against my palm. I ran my hand along the rough surface, searching for a seam, a loose brick, anything that felt out of place. My fingers brushed against a section of wood paneling that was slightly warmer than the rest. I pressed on it. A click echoed in the silence, sharp as a bone snap. The panel popped open, revealing a heavy steel door set directly into the foundation. It wasn't an old Prohibition hidey hole. This was a modern safe. A digital keypad glowed with a faint red light. I stared at the numbers. 4 digits. I tried my birthday. The light blinked red. I tried Rose's birthday. Red again. I tried the year the vineyard was founded. Red. I closed my eyes, listening to the house settle above me. Rose was upstairs, probably sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep of the remorseless. What number would she use? What date was important enough to lock away yet easy enough for her to remember? My breath hitched. I typed in the date of my father's death, October 14th, 1014. The light turned green. The lock disengaged with a heavy metallic thud that vibrated through the floorboards and up into the soles of my boots. I pulled the heavy door open. There was no money inside, no jewelry, just a single thick leather binder and a stack of orange prescription bottles. I reached for the bottles first. The name on the label was my father's, digoxin. It was heart medication, standard for his condition. But as I looked closer, holding the bottle up to the flashlight beam, I saw the dates. These prescriptions hadn't been filled at the local pharmacy in St. Helena. They had been filled at a compounding pharmacy in Mexico, shipped to a P.O. box in San Francisco that I didn't recognize. I opened the leather binder. The first page was a toxicology report. It wasn't the official one that had been released to me and the insurance company. This one was private commissioned by Rose 3 days after the funeral. The levels of digoxin in his system weren't therapeutic. They were lethal. I flipped the page. There was a letter. It was handwritten on Rose's personalized stationery, the heavy cream paper that she used for thank you notes. But this wasn't a thank you note. It was a timeline. A detailed log of doses, times, and reactions. September 30th. He is becoming lucid again. He called the lawyer about the trust. Increased dosage to double at dinner. October 3rd. Confusion sets in. He forgot Natalie's name today. He is compliant. October 12th. He tried to walk to the study. He fell. I helped him back to bed. I gave him the extra dose to help him sleep. He needs to sleep until the amendments are signed. I dropped the binder. It hit the concrete floor with a sound that felt like a gavel coming down on a death sentence. I backed away until my back hit the furnace. The air in the basement suddenly felt too thin to breathe. My father hadn't died of a heart attack. He hadn't just faded away, as Rose liked to say with a tragic sigh. She had managed him. She had chemically restrained him to keep him from protecting the vineyard, and when he fought back, she had silenced him. She hadn't just stolen the land. She had stolen the last years of his life. She had stolen his mind before she stopped his heart. I looked at the orange bottles. I looked at the binder. I wasn't shaking anymore. A cold, hard clarity crystallized in my chest, turning my blood to ice. I gathered everything up. I didn't leave a scrap of paper behind. I walked up the stairs, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. It was 5 a.m. A black town car was already idling in the driveway, its headlights cutting through the morning mist. The driver was loading Rose's Louis Vuitton trunks into the trunk. Rose was standing on the front porch. She wore a trench coat and sunglasses even though the sun hadn't risen yet. She looked impatient, tapping her foot against the stone step. I walked out the front door. The cool morning air hit my face, smelling of dew and damp earth. "You're up early," Rose said, not looking at me. She was watching the driver handle her luggage. "Checking to make sure I don't take the silver—" "No," I said. "Checking to make sure you don't take your freedom." Rose turned to me, lowering her sunglasses. "Excuse me." I held up the leather binder. In the gray light of dawn, Rose's face went the color of ash. She didn't ask what it was. She knew. She recognized the leather. She recognized the weight of her own sins coming back to haunt her. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Her voice wasn't the imperious tone of the matriarch anymore. It was the terrified hiss of a criminal. "You kept it," I said, stepping closer. "Why did you keep it, Rose? Was it a trophy, or was it insurance in case Garrett ever tried to cross you? Did you plan to blame him if anyone ever found out?" "Give it to me," she said, reaching out a hand that trembled violently. "Natalie, give it to me. You don't understand. He was suffering. I did it for mercy. Mercy." I opened the binder to the page I had read downstairs. "Increased dosage to double at dinner because he called the lawyer." "That's not mercy, Mother. That's murder." The driver slammed the trunk of the car shut. The sound made Rose jump. She looked at the car, then back at me. Her eyes darted around the driveway, looking for an escape route, looking for a story she could spin. "It was a long time ago," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Who is going to believe you? I'm an old woman. I'm your mother. You wouldn't send your own mother to prison. You sent my father to the grave," I said. "And you tried to sell his grave for a golf course." I took out my phone. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't call Sloan. I called the number that was saved in my contacts as district attorney, private line. Sloan had given it to me yesterday just in case. "Natalie!" Rose lunged for the phone, her fingers clawing at my arm. "Don't, I'll sign everything over. The annuities, the jewelry. I have an account in the Caymans, $500,000. It's yours. Just let me get in the car." I caught her wrist. Her skin felt paper-thin and cold. I looked into her eyes and saw nothing but greed and fear. There was no love there. There never had been. "I don't want your money," I said, pushing her hand away. "I want justice." "Hello?" A sleepy male voice answered the phone. "This is District Attorney Hayes." "Mr. Hayes," I said, never taking my eyes off Rose. "This is Natalie Kincaid. I have evidence regarding the suspicious death of John Kincaid. I have a confession in the suspect's handwriting, and I have the suspect detained at my property." Rose let out a low wail, a sound of pure despair. She collapsed onto the porch steps, burying her face in her hands. "Don't let her leave," Hayes said, his voice instantly alert. "I'm sending a unit now." I hung up the phone. The driver, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, walked over. "Ma'am, is there a problem? We have a schedule." "The trip is canceled," I said to him. "You can unload the bags." "Natalie, please." Rose sobbed from the steps. She looked small and pathetic, huddled in her expensive coat. "I raised you. I gave you everything." "You gave me nothing," I said. "Dad gave me the vineyard. You just tried to charge me rent." I sat down on the porch swing, the one my father had built with his own hands. I placed the binder on my lap and watched the sun begin to crest over the hills. The light hit the rows of vines, turning the dew into a field of diamonds. Rose continued to weep, but I didn't offer her a tissue. I didn't offer her comfort. I just sat there and waited for the sirens. My phone buzzed again. It was the unknown number. "Did you find it?" I looked at the message. I typed back, "Who is this?" The 3 dots appeared dancing on the screen. Then the answer came. "Avery, I'm sorry, Natalie. Garrett made me hide the safe key years ago. He wanted leverage on Rose. I couldn't let her get away with it. Not after she threw me to the wolves." I lowered the phone. It wasn't a guardian angel. It was just another rat turning on another rat. But it didn't matter. The truth was out. The sound of sirens cut through the morning air, getting louder with every second. Rose stopped crying and lifted her head. She looked at the approaching cars, then she looked at the vineyard. "It will kill you too," she whispered, her voice full of venom. "This place. It demands blood, Natalie. It took your father. It took me. And it will take you." "No," I said, standing up as the sheriff's cruiser turned into the driveway. "It won't take me. Because unlike you, I know that the vines don't work for us. We work for them." I walked down the steps to meet the sheriff. The air was crisp and clean. The harvest was coming. And for the first time in my life, the field was clear of weeds. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was louder than the birds waking up in the oak trees. It was a mechanical, final sound. Rose didn't struggle physically, but her mouth was moving fast, a stream of frantic, whispered denials that spilled into the crisp morning air. "This is a misunderstanding," Rose said to Sheriff Miller, her voice trembling with a vibration I had never heard before. "I am a grieving widow. My daughter is confused. She's been under so much stress with the divorce. You can't take me like this. Not in my coat, not in front of the neighbors." Sheriff Miller didn't look at the neighbors. There weren't any neighbors for a mile. He looked at Rose with the tired patience of a man who had seen too many family tragedies. "You have the right to remain silent, Mrs. Kincaid," he said, guiding her toward the back seat of the cruiser. "I suggest you use it." Rose stopped at the car door. She dug her heels into the gravel. She turned her head to look at me one last time. The morning sun was hitting her face, illuminating the deep lines around her mouth and the terror in her eyes. "You'll lose it all," she spat. The venom was back, cutting through the fear. "You don't have the stomach for business, Natalie. You're soft. You'll be begging me for help within a year." I stood on the bottom step of the porch. I didn't cross my arms. I didn't look away. "I might fail, Mother," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the driveway, "but I won't kill to succeed." The deputy placed his hand on the top of her head and guided her into the vehicle. The door slammed shut. Through the glass, I watched her silhouette slump against the seat. She looked small. For 40 years, she had cast a shadow that covered my entire world. Now she was just an old woman in the back of a police car. I watched them drive away until the dust settled back onto the road. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy and rich, filled with the rustle of the wind in the vines and the distant sound of a tractor starting up in the east block. I walked back up the steps and sat on the swing. I picked up the leather binder that held the proof of her crimes. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt happy. But I didn't feel those things. I just felt a profound, exhausting sense of release, like a heavy pack had been cut from my shoulders after a 20-mile hike. Pilar's truck pulled into the driveway 10 minutes later. She didn't ask questions. She saw the tire tracks. She saw my face. She walked up the steps and sat down next to me. She put a warm, rough hand on my knee. "We have work to do," Pilar said softly. "The crew is waiting at the barn. The sugar levels in the Merlot are high. If we don't pick today, we lose the acidity." I looked at her. "Do they know about the arrest?" "They know the witch is gone," Pilar said, a small, fierce smile touching her lips. "That is all they need to know." I stood up. I smoothed the wrinkles from my trousers. My father was gone. My husband was gone. My mother was gone. "Let's go," I said. "I don't want to miss the harvest." 6 months later, the valley was burning with color. The vines had turned from green to a brilliant fiery gold, and the air smelled of wood smoke and crushed fruit. It was the end of the season, the time when the tourists went home, and the real work of the cellar began. I stood on the crush pad, my boots stained purple with grape juice. The noise was deafening. The destemmer was roaring, the pumps were whining, and the crew was shouting back and forth in a mix of Spanish and English. It was the chaotic, beautiful music of production. "Tank 4 is full," the new cellar master shouted. He was a young guy fresh out of the Davis program with more enthusiasm than experience, but he was honest. He didn't have secret meetings with developers. "Start the pump over," I yelled back, checking the hydrometer reading on the sample in my hand. "And keep the temperature down. I want a slow fermentation this year." A black sedan pulled up near the loading dock. It wasn't the sheriff, it was Sloane. She stepped out of the car looking impeccably out of place in her cream-colored suit and stiletto heels. She waved a thick manila envelope at me. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over to meet her. "You look terrible," Sloane said, looking at my juice-stained shirt and the messy braid coming loose at my neck. "And you look fantastic." "It's a good yield," I said, leaning against the hood of her car. 3 tons an acre. High bricks. It's going to be a vintage year. "I have the final decree," Sloane said, handing me the envelope. "You are officially a single woman, Natalie. Name change and all. You are Natalie Kincaid again, legally and forever." I took the envelope. It felt light. "And Garrett accepted the plea deal this morning," Sloane said. 3 years for fraud and embezzlement. He'll serve 18 months if he behaves. He's already petitioning for a transfer to a minimum security facility near the coast." "Let him petition," I said. He hates the ocean. The salt air ruins his hair. Sloane laughed a sharp, genuine sound. And Rose, the competency hearing is next week. My stomach tightened slightly, but the old panic didn't come. How is she? She doesn't know what year it is, Natalie, Sloane said, her voice softening. Or she's pretending not to. The doctors say it's a dissociative break. She spends her days telling the nurses at the state hospital that she's waiting for her husband to come back from a business trip. She thinks she's still the mistress of the manor. Maybe that's a kindness, I said. For her, anyway. And Avery? Sloane asked. Probation, I said. And 500 hours of community service. She's working at the soup kitchen in Napa. I saw her last week. She didn't look at me. I think that's punishment enough. Sloane looked past me at the busy crush pad, at the workers, moving with purpose at the tanks that held the future of the estate. You did it, she said. Everyone said you'd sell by Christmas. The rumors were vicious. They said you'd drown in the debt. I learned how to swim, I said. Well, Sloane checked her watch. I have a meeting with a client who thinks her husband is hiding assets in Bitcoin. I just wanted to drop this off. Celebration dinner next week. Next week, I promised, when the fermentation is done. I watched her drive away, then I turned back to the winery. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the valley floor. The light caught the sign above the barn door, Kincaid Family Vineyards, established 1948. I walked past the tanks and into the private cellar. It was cool and quiet down here, a sanctuary from the noise above. I walked to the rack where we kept the library wines. I reached for a bottle on the top shelf. It was a 1982 Cabernet, my father's favorite year, the year he had taught me how to prune a vine. I took the corkscrew from the shelf. I didn't hesitate. I drove the worm into the cork and pulled. The sound of the pop echoed off the stone walls. I didn't pour it into a glass. I walked out the back door of the cellar carrying the bottle and headed up the hill to the highest point of the vineyard. The view from here was breathtaking. The rows of vines stretched out like the lines on a map following the contours of the land. I could see the roof of the main house, the chimney smoking gently. I could see the road leading out to the highway. I took a sip of the wine. It was smooth, complex tasting of black cherries and leather and thyme. It tasted like him. You were right, I whispered to the wind. You told me the vines were strong. You just forgot to tell me that I had to be stronger. I poured a splash of the wine onto the ground, a libation for the soil that had given us everything. The dark liquid soaked into the dry earth, disappearing in seconds. Rose had wanted to pave this over. Garrett had wanted to sell it for parts. They saw land. I saw life. I looked at my hands. They were rougher now. My nails were short. I had a callus on my thumb from the pruning shears. They weren't the hands of a socialite. They were the hands of a farmer. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and bruised orange. A cold breeze picked up, rustling the yellow leaves. Winter was coming. The vines would sleep. They would look dead to anyone who didn't know better. But I knew better. Under the soil, the roots were deep. They were drinking from water sources that never went dry, anchoring themselves against the storms to come. I took another sip of wine and turned back toward the house. The lights were coming on in the windows, warm and inviting. Pilar was probably making dinner. The dogs were waiting to be fed. I wasn't just holding the keys to the kingdom anymore. I was the kingdom. I walked down the hill, my boots steady on the uneven ground, ready for whatever the next season would bring. We often tell ourselves that patience is a virtue, that if we just love harder, work longer, or stay quieter, the people hurting us will finally change. We think that holding a family together requires us to swallow our voice and hide our pain. But as Natalie's story shows us, there is a profound difference between loyalty and self-destruction. The most dangerous lie we believe is that keeping the peace is worth losing ourselves. When you stay in a toxic situation to avoid conflict, you aren't actually keeping the peace. You are just absorbing the chaos, so no one else has to hear the noise. Natalie didn't save the Kincaid legacy by being the polite, accommodating daughter she was raised to be. She saved it by becoming the woman she needed to be, someone who understood that forgiveness does not mean permission to harm. Real strength isn't about how much you can endure. It's about drawing a line in the sand and refusing to let anyone cross it, even if they share your last name. You have to be willing to prune the dead branches, no matter how long they've been hanging on the family tree, so that the healthy roots can survive. You don't have to wait until your life is in ashes to grab the wheel. You don't need a crisis to justify your boundaries. Your worth isn't calculated by how much you sacrifice for people who only take. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to make the impossible choice to cut ties with a family member to save your own sanity? Or have you ever realized, like Natalie, that you were holding the keys to your own freedom the entire time? Share your story with us because sometimes just speaking the truth is the first step toward taking back your own vineyard.